This next session is going to be on Eva Hesse's Expanded Expansion. And from the first moments of the planning for this conference over 3 years ago, when Elizabeth Sussman first suggested it, one of the primary goals of the conference has been to try to bring expanded expansion out here. And for some of that time, it looked like it was going to be our sort of holy grail. But the fact that we managed to at least get 2 of the original sections out here is really thanks to the amazing work of people in this next panel, particularly Carol Stringari, who put as many hours into this, I think, as any of the organizers did, and Michelle Barger, who came down and couriered and spent the many fraught hours with us as we were actually trying to get it into the galleries. So please join me in welcoming Michelle Barger, who is the Deputy Head of Conservation at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Carol Stringari, the Chief Conservator at the Guggenheim Museum, Elizabeth Sussman, the Curator, and Sandra Gilman, Curator of Photography at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and our moderator, Jill Sterrett, who's the Director of Collections and Conservation, also at SF MoMA, to talk about Eva Hesse's Expanded Expansion.
Good morning, everybody. It's an extraordinary pleasure to be here, and we couldn't have felt more appreciative of the panel before us, because I think there's going to be really some incredible connections between the discussions around David Novros and what we hope to talk to you today. Before we launch in, of course, I wanted to make a couple of thank yous, and I guess I will say Tom Lerner first. But I have to tell you that as each of these days has gone on, I've seen just how many people at the Getty and how many people on the organizing committee there are to thank. So to all of you, thank you. I think our perpetual thanks goes always to Helen Cherish and Barry Rosen. So thank you all for being here today and for all the other opportunities we've had to work with you. Doug Johns has contributed quite a bit to us and in this project, particularly in the development of the mock-up that you see in the galleries. And last but absolutely not least, Tony Gans, who once again has stepped in to create, I think, wonderful footage for us. It's a way of making the things that we talk about so much more dynamic. So thank you, Tony. Ann Temkin quoted Hippocrates in the introduction to the Conservation Roundtable discussion in the SF MoMA retrospective catalog of 2002. And I've chosen to repeat that today. Life is short, art is long, time is fleeting, experience fallible, decisions difficult. So first of all, I repeat this because the mere act of repetition is really a reverential nod to one of Hesse's signature qualities. Second, I think at a conference like this, we may choose to quibble with the art is long part of that aphorism. The third part is that for repeating it again and repeating something that's already been published about Hesse was a proactive move to respond to any of you who may be thinking, we're talking about this again? I think this is a conversation that's happened for many, many years, and I hope one of the things that comes up in this panel is that we can really talk about the value of that. Hesse's work moves people on numerous levels, and her acclaim has certainly made her the focus of many, many, many exhibitions, books, and publications. Indeed, people behind that scholarship are here in numbers today. Moreover, her materials, rubber and resin, and her processes for making sculpture seem to captivate the imagination. And I think this is perhaps because they really vividly dramatize the often unanswerable questions about life and living. This has also contributed to making her work the subject of significant scholarship. So now I just want to summarize what I think the problem is. The problem is that after the ideas have been discussed and the exhibits have been mounted and the catalogs have been published, there's still a sculpture, and in this case it's expanded expansion, that's in storage waiting. And making a decision or a move is at the heart of why I think we're still talking about this today. Caring for Hesse's work leads us to look very critically at the way we make our decisions. For example, what's the difference between doing something, doing nothing, and not deciding at all? For collections of contemporary art, this is something we grapple with every day. And as Nancy Troy and others described yesterday, in between the factual accounting of a work and the decisions we make on behalf of those contemporary works of art, there's a wide interpretive gap. Perhaps this conference will serve us well if we look at the relationships between curators, art historians, conservators, and artists and their estates, and how we operate here in this gap. So today, you're going to be brought into the gap, and you're going to be doing it, I think, in the company of a panel of longtime collaborators. But be assured, we're going to be looking for your thoughts in the discussion. I couldn't be more honored to be rejoining these folks next to me. Elizabeth Sussman is a curator at the Whitney, and I just wanted to say that I think we've seen not only a smart woman, but she brings a kind of courage to her ideas, and we've seen that in her work with Eva Hesse, Diane Arbus, and Gordon Mata-Clark most recently. Very simply, Carol Stringari and my beloved colleague, Michelle Barger, are two conservators I feel highly privileged to work with. And they bring a level of sophistication to the real issues around contemporary art that I think is really quite model. So here we go. But before we do, I want to hand it off. I wanted to just outline the three sort of main parts of the presentation that you're going to hear, because we've chosen to make this presentation more of a discussion between them. So you're going to see them sharing, I think, in the three parts. First of all, we'll be talking about Eva Hesse and the making of expanded expansion. Secondly, we'll be looking to sort of summarize the work's chronology and its life at the Guggenheim, as well as the decisions that have been made to care for Hesse's work to date. And finally, we'll be looking at the Mockup, and we'll be talking about the Mockup and its presence in this discussion. And let me emphasize that word Mockup. So without further ado, here we go. I'm going to invite Elizabeth Sussman to take it from here.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill. And I could go on at great length about the people I'm sitting with and the people who have made this possible, because it means so much to all of us who have been involved. Well, the present team has been involved for about 10 years now, almost. And but there are people in this room who go back to the day this work was made, who have been a part of this process as you will see it unfold. And as Jill said, going into this discussion, I think our minds are so open and so unresolved, and so in this whole situation is so much in process itself that we don't, I think, have any answers to exactly what we're involved in. Based on the great work of Lucy Lepard and Bill Barrett, and to the wondrous decision that Helen Cherish, Eva's sister, made about putting her papers into the Allen Museum at Oberlin, we have great insight into, or some insight into, the last couple of months that she was able to work before she got very ill, which is the period of time when this work, Expanded Expansion, was made. So I am just going to talk very briefly about those months, literally. So this is a photograph of Eva Hesse taken, I believe, in March of 1969 in her studio, looking at Expanded Expansion finished. Probably finished, I should say. But I'll go back to just a year before this, or a year and a half before this, to just give you a little bit of a sense of what she had been up to. She had opened her only one-person exhibition, which was called Chain Polymers, in the fall of 1968 at the Fishback Gallery. For that exhibition, which included fiberglass works and works made in latex, she had employed two ways of working. The fiberglass work she had done with Doug Johns, who's here today, first of all, in his studio or his fabrication company, which was called Aegis. She had gone there to make some of the fiberglass work with him. She had never worked in fiberglass before, and he had considerable experience working in fiberglass. He had actually worked with Robert Morris and other people as well. Sure, yeah. This is an installation shot of the Fishback Gallery for that 1968 exhibition, and what you're looking at are mainly the room of fiberglass works. But I think we have a slide of another work that was in that exhibition, which is the latex work Schema, which was also in this exhibition. It had been made a little bit earlier in beginning in 66, when Hesse had started to work in using latex. Jill said to be sure to point out that Eva Hesse had gone to Yale for graduate studies as a painter. She had never studied sculpture at Yale, and so she, when she came to discover latex and decided that she liked to use it, it was at thinking of her interest as a painter that this material seemed like such a logical thing for her. The latex work, such as the one that you're looking at, Hesse worked on at home in her own studio at 134 the Bowery. After the exhibition closed in 1968, and it was very positively received, Hesse was busy. She was asked to participate in several major exhibitions, and so in the following months, that is the end of 1968, January of 1969, she really began to work hard. And she produced, and I'm not going to show you all these pictures of all these things, but she produced a work that's known as Sans 3. She produced a work that's known as Vinculum 2. And these were works that involved latex. Johns stayed on after the opening of the exhibition to help Hesse with her interest in fiberglass, which continued. But instead of working at Aegis, his company, they actually set up shop in her studio at 134 the Bowery. And, yeah, sure. This is from a slightly later period. It shows the work that's called Rope Piece, which is now at the Whitney Museum, and this was made in November of 1969, starting in November of 1969. Anyway, she, at that point, got an assistant in her gallery. So besides Doug Johns, there was Eva and a woman whose name is Martha Sheave, who had been sent by the Great Lakes College Association, I think somehow through Oberlin College, which was because of the director, a place that she was very involved with. And she made, at that point, with Martha and with Doug, Connection, a piece which is now in the Tony Gans collection, Expanded Expansion, the piece we're talking about today, a long, skinny piece that looks like a very long icicle, which is often referred to as ice piece now, also made of fiberglass, now at the Art Institute of Chicago, and Vinculum 1, which is at the Museum of Modern Art. She began to make Expanded Expansion in February of 1969, and by March 3rd, she had finished the piece. So, look at it, finished. And this is the piece in her studio. And for those of you who have gone to see the work, as you will see from subsequent photographs we're going to show you, the work, as you see it in Eva Hesse's studio, is configured around a corner instead of being spread out horizontally. It was made up of 13 sections, and in this photograph, it rounds the corner. By March 3rd, she had finished this and 2 other pieces, the piece I called the Icicle piece and Vinculum 2, and they were all bound to go to a very important Whitney Museum exhibition that was called Anti-Illusion that was scheduled to open in that spring. All the work was completed then by early March, we know from her own appointment books, and by March 31st, and probably even a little earlier than that, Hesse was too sick to work and had stopped working completely. The question is, and we'll get into more of this, is how much did she actually work on this work, which was made in February and March as she was becoming increasingly less able to work. As I said, she was making these 3 pieces. They were very important to her for this Whitney exhibition, which was scheduled to open in May. It was an exhibition devoted to the idea of process in art. And for the catalog, these pictures were taken that I'm showing you. And they were all taken in the artist's studio. So the people who were in the show included Richard Serra, Keith Saunier, Bruce Nauman, just to mention a few. And the idea was that they were, that all of these people were very involved with process and materials, and to see them working with their materials in their studio, in the publication that was being produced of the show was very important. So Marcia Tucker and Jim Monty, who were the curators of that exhibition, sent Robert Fiore, who's a well-known filmmaker, out into the studios to take these wonderful process shots. So all the pictures that I'm showing you are from his photo shoot, and they were taken sometime in that period of March. Hesse noted in her appointment books that she didn't like this idea of this thesis of process, that she didn't think of process was anything of great importance to her. It was just a means to an end, and she found it all sort of questionable, but she was very involved in this catalog, and there's actually a drawing of the catalog page and how her works would look. And there, in the Whitney files, there are letters from the curators talking to her about what her position is going to be on the floor plan of this exhibition and so on. So she was very aware of the exhibition, how it was coming together, and who she was going to be showing next to. Actually, she was placed next to Richard Serra. And the questionnaire it's very interesting because it asks her some information about her project, so it indicates to me that the curators did not exactly know what she was doing in her studio and what would be in the exhibition. It was this beginning of this moment of installation art. The exhibition was called Anti-Illusion Procedures Materials, and these photographs are invaluable to us to look at now because we see the work in a very early stage in her studio. The next thing we know a little bit about is that when the show opened, that Hesse was too ill to be involved with the installation. The piece went up. The show opened in May. She had been actually operated on in April. And so the way the piece was hung was done, I assume, by her assistants and by the Whitney staff. And here you see a picture of her at the Whitney in front of the piece in actually, I think, either June or July after she had been operated on, but before the exhibition closed. In January of 1970, Hesse gave her famous interview to Cindy Nemser, which there's been much interesting information and speculation and discussion about that, primarily from Anne Wagner, what has been edited out, what you read between the lines, and so on and so forth. So you cannot take these statements exactly as anything except an edited version of an important interview, and it's all we have to go on. And Hesse said of this work, Expanded Expansion, something that I think is very interesting, and I quote, Hesse says, "I thought I would make more of it, but sickness prevented that. Then it could actually be expanded to a length that one would really feel would be environmental." And then she says, this piece does have an option. I believe that means that she felt that it could round the corner. And then she goes on to say, I think that what confuses people in a piece like this is that it's so silly. In notes found in the papers at Oberlin, Hesse wrote further about expanded expansion, and she compared it to this piece called Ice Piece, both of which were bound for the Whitney exhibition. And I quote, "Intentionally, two pieces of great contrast in form but similar in thought and extreme position. Both are endless. If the ceiling were higher or space on the floor larger, it could be as well be confined and exaggerate its position more. The rubberized cheesecloth could also continue. Both take a stand on absurdity, both by means of form as well. One is endless and yet a thin, longish substance that is linked together, and one feels the infinity to which it could extend. The other is opposite in form, large, looming, powerful, yet precarious. Its positioning as a unit or sectional units could take many stands." In other words, it was variable in her mind. Skipping ahead to November of 2000 now, and we will be talking a lot about what happened to the work in between. I was working on the retrospective that I had been asked to curate for the San Francisco Museum. And in thinking about what I could do in that exhibition, I read a review that was actually written by Lynn Cook for the Burlington magazine, in which she reviewed the exhibition that had been at Yale of Eva Hesse's work. And Lynn, in that review, said that it was an amazing exhibition that had taken place at Yale, but that it unfortunately had been lacking in these great pieces of the end of Hesse's life, which were in such poor condition that they could never be shown. And so therefore, we were seeing a great, great artist, but not an artist's greatest works, possibly, or we didn't know because we couldn't see them. So as I went to work, I thought to myself, I'm going to visit all those works and see what the story is. And so I began to make the rounds, and at that point, Michelle and I started making the rounds together. And we definitely knew about this piece, Expanded Expansion, and we were very interested in, of course, borrowing it for the exhibition. Well, the answer was that the piece was absolutely impossible to exhibit, and there was no way that the Guggenheim could imagine it's being shown because of various condition problems, which Carol will tell you about. And so, ever determined to do something about this, I went to see the then acting director, or she was assistant director, Lisa Dennison of Guggenheim, and I begged her to do something about this piece, and I suggested that if the show came to New York, the Hesse retrospective I was working on, that perhaps she could think of putting the piece up even for a little while in a gallery at the Guggenheim, so at least they wouldn't have to send the piece into the retrospective, but that we could see the piece. And I think for a while she considered doing that, but then lots of circumstances took over and it never happened. But what did happen was that we decided to convene, for the sake of the catalog, a group of people who could comment on the fact that there were these problems in knowing Hesse's work, that there were some pieces that were that did not exist anymore for one reason or another. And Expanded Expansion was very high on the list, and the roundtable was held in New York. Now, to that roundtable were invited curators and conservators and people who had known Eva Hesse and people who were writing about Eva Hesse, and we had a 2-day event, and the first day was spent at the Guggenheim looking at Expanded Expansion in its crates. And then the next day, we all sat down to talk about a variety of situations. I'll quote Ann Temkin again because she moderated this roundtable discussion, and she described the feelings of many of us who went to the Guggenheim that day. Ann writes, "On this November afternoon, the visitors' reactions ranged from a sad dismissal of any potential for further display to a deep appreciation of an enduring beauty," which was true. But there were some people who looked at it and felt that it was a hopeless thing that had no life whatsoever, and others thought it was incredibly beautiful. Sol LeWitt, who we've talked about a lot, who was there, argued during the roundtable very much for the issue of remake, in particular of Hesse's works, and he was particularly involved with another remake situation of an earlier piece called Metronomic Irregularity, which no longer exists, and which he had remade, and which he distinguished from a hands-on piece of work like Expanded Expansion, and which he felt could be remade and should be remade. Bryony Fair, who was one of the participants, weighed in heavily on the question of remakes and exhibition of Hesse's work, and her words were very eloquent, and I will quote them and read them to you. Bryony said, "My view is that institutions should show these sculptures, even Expanded Expansion, though it has departed so much from its original appearance." I agreed very much, Bryony said, with the remark somebody on the panel had made yesterday, that some of Hesse's work should be remade because the fabricators and assistants are around to be involved in that. But I worry that these options are being presented in an either-or way. We really need a plurality of approaches. Some of the Hesse sculptures can and should be remade by the original collaborators because time is running out on our ability to do that in a legitimate way. On the other hand, remaking a certain work does not mean that we should retire the original from view. I will stop there because I don't want to get too much at this point into the question of Eva Hesse's own views about the aging of her work, but I think we will get back to that at the end of this presentation.
Yeah. The question has come up, so why, where are we now? Where are we after having these roundtable discussions and the opportunities to see works installed in the retrospective co-organized by San Francisco and Wiesbaden, Museum Wiesbaden, and then that traveled around, seen by a lot of people, subsequent exhibitions at the Jewish Museum. And we are still returning to these discussions and these debates, which makes it particularly difficult for Carol and her institution to make these decisions. And Carol wants to come to closure with this. Their institution would like to get closer to that. So we are really hoping that's the reason, one of the main reasons it's here, too, is to really hear from a body of people who bring so much to this, too. Similar situations that you may have from ephemeral works of art that you are dealing with as conservators of contemporary art, curators of contemporary art historians. So we are going to, at the end of this, open this up and really hope to hear from you. You've seen the works installed, and so we'd like to get your input. And to get there, we want to start with giving you a little more background information and wanted to tell you about the process and materials of the making of this work. And this, again, is one of those black and white photographs from the work in the studio. She made this, before I start, I wanted to say that this work was made in 3 sections, and as you know, 2 of the 3 are in the gallery at the Getty. So, the first, I'm going to refer to them by their panels. So there's a 2-panel section, then the 4-panel section, which you see in the Getty galleries, which is face down, and then this very large 7-panel section that could not even fit in a truck. So that's another issue. So we were thrilled to get 2 here. It's important to see the enormity of the work, and I also wanted to show you some details that Elizabeth brought up in one of the quotes. the contrast, the oppositions in this piece that you really see in these early photographs. The panel sections are made from taking cheesecloth, placing it on the floor of her studio, a single layer of cheesecloth, and painting out, rubbing out, dabbing out natural latex rubber onto this cheesecloth. Then there are fiberglass poles, which you also saw in the galleries. They are comprised of two main elements, a flat strip and a tube that goes on top of it, both of them made out of fiberglass and polyester resin. So the rubberized cheesecloth peeled off the floor, peeled off the plastic, and then assembled within these poles by sandwiching them to the flat part of the strips. And this is a more recent photograph that you can see. Actually, two kinds. Sorry, I keep hitting that. Two kinds of fiberglass. There's a woven pattern in this woven fiberglass, which is much more flexible, much more easily made into a round pole, and then that random matte pattern that is used to make up this flat strip. Then this is the cheesecloth that is sandwiched between the fiberglass strip. Elizabeth already talked to you a little bit about the studio practices and what was going on, and then at this particular time, Doug Johns was working with her, and we had an opportunity in conversations with him to understand more about the specific practice for this work. As Elizabeth mentioned, he's very involved in the fiberglass portion and also helping to figure out the structural, how Hesse would have ideas come to Doug and talk to him about how do we then structurally make this happen. So Doug was involved in that, and one thing that we learned that's very interesting is the smaller two-panel section, which you see in the gallery, was one that Doug said he and Eva really worked out the solution. Here's my idea. There are drawings. She has a sketch of her idea. She wasn't sure. In her drawing, she wrote cheesecloth to go through poles, ? In the end, that didn't happen. But Doug talks about that two-panel section as being a bit of a prototype in a way to solve the problem, to figure it out. And then the subsequent two sections were prepared. Some of the elements, the fiberglass elements, prepared by Doug in advance, and then Martha Shive and possibly others, but I think just Martha at this point, came in and worked with Hesse during the day to put it together. So one thing in looking more closely at it, and you can see this if you have a chance to go back, the smaller one that I'm calling a prototype type of the section, the edges are much more irregular, much looser. And in the other two sections, the edges are much more regular. And we also could see, knowing that there were other hands in this and looking at the work with Doug, we could see how that different hand in the application of the rubber that you could see throughout the works.
I just want to say, when we say prototype, this was a part of the piece that was being worked out by the artist and Doug, but it actually is the first section of the piece.
Yeah, that's my quote. Yeah. And maybe at this point you can go on and talk about the life of it once it came into the Guggenheim. Here's we heard about. You might want to go to the next one, because that was...
Thank you. I've been asked to put together a little bit of a chronology of its life at the Guggenheim, which is not always clear-cut, but we're going to try to take you through from 1972 to the present, what has transpired and why we're here today. And I don't want to spend too much time on thank yous, but I have to say this has been an enormous effort. So many people have been involved, and I just have to thank everybody for making this happen. As Jill said at the beginning very articulately, we had a conversation very early on saying, okay, we've been here before, we're not going to go to this conference and say exactly the same thing, and we thought about what is it that we can do to move this forward. So that will come up and we'll tell you how that happened. But here you see the piece at the Memorial Exhibition in 1972 on Ramp 6, and you can see how it's installed leaning against the wall as a curtain, drapery, not going around a corner as we had seen. Obviously, this was not installed by the artist who was deceased by then. This was a memorial exhibition. It was organized by Linda Shearer, who was then at the Guggenheim Museum, and it went on to 4 other venues, some of them of which I have photos and some which I don't. But I just wanted to take you through these because it's nice to see the piece in context, the exhibition. At this point, the piece did not belong to the Guggenheim Museum. Again, here you see it during the exhibition. I'm looking at the wrong. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. 1972 at the Guggenheim. Here we have it. 1973, same exhibition at the Albright Knox. You can see it in the background as it was installed there, again leaning against the wall. This is UC Berkeley, where you can see it's. I'm not sure if it was lit very differently, but certainly the lighting for the photograph is very different, and it has this almost backlit quality to it. But you're able to see, again, the draping. It's pulled out further, which the whole idea of expansion here, you're beginning to see how, depending on where it's installed, how different it can look. And now I'm fast forwarding, although I want to just say in 1975, the piece was generously donated by Helen Charash, the sister of Eva, and it was an amazing acquisition for the institution, and there's a lot of correspondence in the files about what a wonderful thing it was. And it comes into the collection, and it's kept in storage from 1975 until 77, and it's in Hahn Brothers Storage in New York City, which is where it was at the time of the acquisition. And in 1977, it is exhibited in a collections gallery at the Guggenheim, which we do not have an image of, unfortunately. But one thing, just backing up just a little bit, because this is going to make sense once we get further on in the conversation, I pulled out a registrar's note file, and it goes from 73 through 74, from the Guggenheim to Chicago to Pasadena to Berkeley, and at each and every venue we have notes about tears. We have in 73, we have 6 tears, which range from 2 inches to 4 1/4 inches. So this is just to set the stage as to the handling of such an enormous piece and what might occur during that handling. The piece was fresh and flexible, and it was still, at the time, very fragile and subject to tears. And then we have notes that Bill Barrett, who was also one of Eva's assistants and traveled with the show, mended those tears. He mended those tears locally. So all along during this memorial exhibition, the piece was being mended. Okay, what I would like to point out here is that we're jumping forward again to 1986, which is the next recorded exhibition of the work at the Guggenheim. And this is Transformations in Sculpture, 4 Decades of American and European Art by Diane Waldman. And it's a collection show, and this is the rotunda of the Frank Lloyd Wright building. And it's difficult to see, but the piece has already darkened and embrittled quite a bit. So we're in 1986. The piece is front and center, very, very important for the show. And you can see it here. Again, notes about it, tearing. I think actually there are people in the audience who were at the Guggenheim at the time who may have even mentored it. I'm not sure. They may want to say something later, but it was always a very difficult piece logistically to move around. I'm taking you forward to 1988, which is the last time it was exhibited at the Guggenheim. And you can see what a dramatic difference there is. It's quite darkened. It's embrittled. It doesn't have the same type of drapery that it had when it was first exhibited. But what I would like to point out is that many of us saw this in 1988 and were moved and excited and just felt the piece was absolutely gorgeous. We all knew that it didn't look the way it looked when it was executed, but it wasn't questioned. It wasn't questioned in any way in the files, in the curatorial files, in any writing about the piece. And I find that interesting because now the piece is not that different, because we spoke to many, many rubber specialists, and we've been told, although it is very, very brittle, that it had this very sharp curve of aging and deterioration, and it reached a certain point and it's now plateaued, and although we'll see continued deterioration, it is not going to be to the extent that you see right now. So just so you know, the piece, although it's not standing up and it's difficult to stand it up, it doesn't look that different aesthetically from what it did in 1988. Now, what happened in 1988 that made it unexhibitable in everyone's eyes is difficult to, it's very, very difficult for me to reconstruct. I've spoken to lots and lots of people. It was taken down, and it was understood that the way it had been stored, rolled upon itself, they would talc it every time, put powder on it and roll it upon itself so it didn't stick, and I think that's the way it lived until this time. And then there was a concern, after speaking to all of these rubber specialists, that perhaps it should be stored in a different way. And this configuration that you see now is something that was designed between conservators and art handlers and fabricators, and it was a very well-intentioned attempt to put this work into a configuration where it could live safely. In retrospect, it probably was not the best decision in terms of the drapery and how the piece continued to age and stiffen. However, it was safe. It was on a layer of Volara. It was covered with polyester, and it was very well cared for. However, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I want to show you it's on these half rounds, which was an attempt to keep some form of the piece alive. And we had some space constrictions. I wasn't there when this was made, but there was, what I understand is there were space constrictions, and so these half rounds were allowing it to be constricted a little bit so that we could store it in a reasonable area. There was not that much storage at the Guggenheim at that time. There were a lot of notes about, if we're going to show this again, it's an enormous treatment, back and forth, all of the conservators who were there over the years. One of the things that Jill and I have been talking about in relation to this project is how are decisions made within these institutions, and I think there are a lot of you out there who know decisions can take many, many years. There are many factors as to why or why not something is exhibited, why it's treated, why it's not treated. And I mean, I have to say this, in some ways we can simplify this to a certain extent, in that the sheer scale of this piece, the cost of treating it, and this problem of no one agreeing whether it still has the integrity or the amount of life that it needs to have to represent Eva Hesse, it was still out there. And I think what happened was we were asked by our curators, okay, can you treat this? And we would come back and say, we could probably find a way to treat this, but it's a lot of research and it costs a lot of money. And they said, well, is this something that someone wants to exhibit? And of course, Elizabeth wanted to exhibit, but by the time we did the roundtable, it was too late to treat it, the entire piece. And then we had all of these varying opinions as to what it was. And we're still there, and that's when we talk about closure. I'm not saying closure, I never want to talk about this again. I'm talking about closure in terms of, is it exhibitable? And I mean, I am not objective anymore, so I'm not the person to talk about whether or not it's exhibitable. But I am the person that would be able to push forward the treatment if we could make that kind of decision. And so when I talk about closure, that's what I mean. But anyway, here is the piece as you see it in the gallery. This is the second section. I don't know if you can see, it's probably a little difficult to see because the slide is not very good, but that is a tear that was from the 70s that was just restored during the tour by sticking some adhesive along the tear. So there are a lot of these on the piece. This is Michelle and the Guggenheim sculpture conservator Nathan, who's here. We went out to the warehouse. We invited Doug Johns to come out and really take a look at the piece. Because I think there's also this myth that keeps being handed down. Oh, it can't stand up, it can't support its weight. And whether that myth is true or not, I began to question, because I'm not sure we had done enough real looking to make that decision. So we went out there to do that, and you can see here we're lifting it up to see how flexible it still remains, and shining light through it to see exactly how the rubber looks. This is Doug contemplating the piece, thinking about the construction, taking himself back 40 years, which I have to say, his memory was quite incredible, and that day taught us a lot about what we might do to move forward. And I think this day was key. I'm going forward. This day was key in our deciding to do a materials mock-up, because there are so many issues about moving this piece, and it's the kind of piece. I think there were a number of talks where you cannot do these kinds of tests. I can't move that piece without testing on something, because it's too enormous and it will tear if we don't have the right method. In 1994, Martin Langer came, who's worked extensively on Eva Hesse, and we have a wonderful proposal to make a mold for the back of this piece, and it's in order to stand it up, and then we would have to do it again for the seven-part piece. And it's something that, if it were decided it was exhibitable, I think it could be done. We would like to test it on the mock-up that we made. And I just wanted to say very quickly, what happened after that happened so fast, and so we just decided, okay, we're going to see.
I have to interrupt you because you need to say that was December. It was just last month. This meeting just happened.
Yes, after
4 weeks
12
ago.
Years. After 12 years, we did this. Right, we did this in November. We looked at the
December.
And then we talked about it, and Michelle and Doug and I decided, okay, we're going to fly out to Topanga Canyon, where Doug offered to give us some space, and we're going to try and recreate a part of this piece, not as a replica, but for us to really understand how this piece was made, how we can move it around, how we can potentially treat the piece. And I felt bringing the work out solely in that storage crate, which makes it, I think it's a very strange contraption, and lends something to the piece that it doesn't need or want. I thought that we can at least handle that two-panel piece and mend it to the point where it will be stable enough to stand up. We didn't want to do anything irresponsible. We had an ethnographic conservator, Linda Nievenhausen, come in, and we did very, very minor, well, I wouldn't say minor, they were extensive, but we bridged all of the tears, and then on the back of it we put sort of a temporary support of stable text so that the entire piece is supported so that it could stand up. And then we created this travel frame that it could come out on. Our fabricators, our preparator staff, our conservators, everyone was working on it. It was really a wonderful example of a collaborative project where many different disciplines were involved. And we were on the phone all the time.
Can I illustrate collaborative decision-making here? Because we knew with this panel that we had so much information that we could talk for hours, and I want to make sure that we make time for discussion.
Yeah.
Can we go to the mock-up since you've been speaking about it?
Absolutely.
And then, Michelle, can you come back and talk about some of the treatments for the late works?
Sure.
Okay, we'll do it that way.
We need Greg up there in the booth to, right? That's what we're going to now.
Yeah.
We, as you heard earlier, we had Tony Gans, who generously offered to videotape what was going on. Oh, you can just black it out there. And so we had this wonderful opportunity to come out to Topanga in December and to work with Doug. One of the nice things, Carol mentioned that Doug has a really wonderful memory. There's also the latex that Hesse used is still being made by the same company, Cementex, in New York City. And so we still have that, and we were able to get that material. And the fiberglass, the resin is probably very similar. But the idea was to understand, as Carol mentioned, well, actually, I'm going to let you'll hear me speak in a second, so I won't say what I was just about to say because it's going to be in the film. So we're not showing the entire thing. It has some lovely Topanga flavor, which you'll enjoy, and let's roll it.
So here we go.
What we're doing here today is a mock-up of Expanded Expansion, which is in the collection of Guggenheim. That has a piece from 1969. And our goal in doing this is, I guess, for a number of different purposes. Carol, who's the conservator there, is very familiar with what conservators like to do in making mock-ups of how artworks were made, replicating the technique, replicating the materials, in order to understand how things were made and also what kinds of things might result from the process. We are learning a lot by doing this and seeing certain things that we see as what we thought may be condition issues in the original work that we learn now are actually part of the technique, part of the process. It's something that is really useful for conservators to understand before they even start to treat a work of art. The original work has 13 panels, 13 rubber panels made in 3 sections. One section of 2 panels, one of 4, and one of 7.
It's been in storage for 10 years.
Well, we showed it at the Guggenheim in 1986, but it was already darkened and embrittled, but many of the pieces are.
What we're doing now is saturating this. This is fiberglass and this is polyester resin. And when we saturate it, it will turn translucent like this and harden up in a few hours. And this is a rigid piece at this point. But this is nice and soft. And a lot of this was done by students because she wanted to have the students get their fingers wet into the mess and so forth. But a lot of the resin work I did, and then a lot of the rubber work she had the students do. Now this particular part is the reinforcement part. This is the strong part. And this kind of gives it integrity enough so that it'll stand up. We can poke it a little bit, in the areas where it's white, to poke it. Put a little more resin on it.
Did students ever help with the polyester and fiberglass?
Yeah, they did a little bit, not a lot. Almost always when I was around. And of course, the last piece they did all alone. We did experiments, and and she would say, "Well, I want to do this. I want to try this," and I would say, "Well, this is the way we can accomplish this." And And this was somewhat what this piece was all about, because we had to make poles that were stiff enough. And so, you know, I figured out this technique of doing this to make kind of a stiff pole that was translucent and, you know, would have lots of light coming through it. And yet be light enough and, you know, something that we could move around.
Do you ever talk about the fragility of latex and what might happen to it?
All the time. You know, I've made her very aware that this stuff was not going to last. And she says, fine.
And we should talk about the differences in the fiberglass. Doug?
Right. Well, this is a woven thing with long longitudinal strands, which of course then become a working beam structurally. Ready? Let's.
You do your edge. Okay,
Okay, I'm coming up.
Wait, here, do you have it rolled enough?
Okay. I've got that. Oh, I got someone right
Yeah,
there.
Doug, line up.
I'm going to line it up at this end. Come down this way. That's it right there. I'm going to pull it down this way just a little bit.
There's one panel that's much darker than the rest now.
Is it more brittle?
It has gone to a state of deterioration where it's actually more flexible than everything else because it's completely lost its integrity. If that makes sense. Like the other ones are brittle and hard, and this one went a little bit further so that the latex is all kind of broken up. So it actually drapes better than the rest of them because it's further deteriorated.
Now, just by the way, there's probably a lot of what we did then, too.
You had to find space wherever you could find it, huh?
Yeah, nothing went totally smooth.
So we're putting out this really thin mill plastic, and you can see already the texture in it, all the wrinkles and things, which is something that she talked about really liking because it translated into the rubber panels, and you really see that when you look at the works. This thicker mill plastic, you see there's ridges and creases, and it holds its memory that way, and that immediately translates into the rubber.
What we're going to do now is we're going to make a rubber panel. And this involves a different kind of resin, which is just strictly latex, which is liquid. And so it's just a sap. And they put modifiers in it and things like that to make it last longer. And it goes on quite liquid. And over a few hours, the moisture comes out, and this smells quite strongly of ammonia. I did say there were dogs, and I forgot. Now, the next process is we have to remove this somehow and put it someplace.
The transition when the light comes through here, it's just so beautiful when you can see the differences in the thick and thin applications. And
Now it still has plastic behind it, so we'll get that off, and you'll really be able to see.
in all of those early exhibition shots, you see it glowing. You know, it almost looks backlit, but it's just the light bouncing.
What I want to do is cut this into 4 pieces and then rip each one of them in half. So that what we'll do is have a double layer. We'll put the cut edge on here and then come up over with the ripped edge, you know, and it'll come in this area. And we're going to put rubber here, and then we're going to put another layer of fiberglass on top and over.
And this is a third type of fiberglass.
This is thin. This is just, it's the same mat, it's just a little thinner.
And you,
I think, if I remember, the original was actually done with 1.5 ounces. So this is 2 ounce and this is 3/4. So who knows, you know, what's going on. But that, I think it was 1.5 ounces mat. Okay. What it'll do is it'll overlap.
this will disappear, the frayed edge.
This will sort of disappear, right? She would tell me what she wanted, and I would tell her structurally how it would have to be built. And then she would either accept that longer. The urethane rubber is much longer, but it doesn't have the same feel to it. And also it was more expensive and harder to work with. Now see, normally we would have let this dry much longer.
Yeah, there's still some uncured rubber underneath.
Yeah, but luckily the edges are okay, so that's what we're...
Well, it has integrity. It feels.
Yeah, it's enough. When it's fresh, it's great. If you did this with a piece that's 40 years old, it would just crumble. Lift it further, not right at the edge, but right at the end. Because you want to have poles that, with this curtain in between. The cheesecloth was, at that point, a staple, and the cheesecloth and the rubber was a staple in their diet. There were random lengths. Maybe we'll just start
here?
We'll start it right up here.
Okay.
And then come over, tuck that in.
Okay. You got that, Carol?
So you'd
Just
like
feel
the,
the edge. Make sure the rubber is.
This is definitely a trickier little procedure. Let's just pull it back and let's rest it.
Right? And
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
sort of like this.
Yeah, but we'll flood it. This, oh, what a mess.
You ready?
We're all set.
Are these,
These are the ones.
all right, should we use 2 buckets then? Okay.
I'll put the resin on.
All right. I'll follow you then.
You can follow and just put the, roll the
The rubber in.
rubber in. When she and I worked, we would work crazy hours whenever it was available. And she was, her whole life was art.
We've been working for 2 days and just working on parts, and I think the full assembly, putting this third pull in to get 2 complete panels, was that kind of aha moment of seeing it really come together. Even though it's on the ground right now, really seeing still the flexibility and movement of these rubber panels. Because that's the main difference. Do you want to go ahead? We cut that a little short, and if people are interested in seeing more, we can show you later. I'm just going to briefly talk about a couple of other late works for which we found solutions. Late works that weren't in the 92 Yale show, but were either in the 2002 retrospective or in the Jewish Museum show in 2006. And I'm also not going to talk so much about specific treatment, because that's not, for us, what really is at the crux of moving these decisions forward. I want to talk about, in particular, what made it possible? What made it possible to move these two forward? And I think having my involvement in both of those exhibitions as a consultant at the Jewish Museum gave great perspective and increased my knowledge. Nancy Troy said more knowledge is more, and I feel like all of us are reaching that and absorbing more, and give us a certain level of confidence to be able to move forward in some of these things. In both of these works, this is a work, Ott, hanging on the wall, Augmentus on the floor from 1968. Each institution has, as Carol knows and as you heard, large and on these works. Every time they're brought up for an exhibition, the discussion happens. The discussion kicks in, and you end up going around and around, and ultimately not having enough information to make the decision, and it doesn't end up in an exhibit. This work is in the collection of the Berkeley Art Museum, and they showed it in the mid-'90s, had it on view for only a couple of weeks, and in the corner, part of the rubber dripped, literally dripped. And you probably are familiar, or I use the example a lot of times with the rubber band when you go to reach for it. Sometimes it's very, very brittle and snaps and is powdery, and other times it can be quite sticky. And that is something that happens within natural rubber. Within this piece, in the thickness around the perimeter, there was oozing and stickiness that happened, and the piece dripped. So they were very concerned, took it off view, and when we approached them for 2002, they were interested in being able to loan because they wanted for themselves to solve this problem, to come up with a solution. So in advance of it, again, assembling a group of people, Sharon Blank, Brian E. Fair, myself, and Lucinda Barnes, who was then at the Berkeley Art Museum, all looked at this piece and talked about it, talked about possibilities. Lucinda Barnes, I should mention, was at Oberlin and was familiar with Hesse, with the archives there as well. So it was, I think, again, bringing people together and talking about this and being able to consider possibilities, and then as conservators feeling what options do we have. And we ended up making a sort of a strip lining on the reverse with cheesecloth, turned out to be the best material, attached with methyl cellulose. And here you see it on the reverse and trimmed up so that when it is on view, you don't see the cheesecloth from the front. Again, working with Sharon Blank on this, and also with, I have to thank Amanda Hunter-Johnson at SF MoMA, who really helped so much with this treatment. Here it is on view at SF MoMA, and I want to just point out something that can inform our discussion later. This has been considered, a successful treatment, a successful work, an exhibitable piece. There are people who draw concerns to the fact that these panels, which are actually pillows of sort with canvas in the center, in that early picture you saw a little bit of billowing to it. When it's stored flat, the rubber then forms around the stuffing in these pillows, which is in some cases, I think, plastic sheeting or rope, and it has this sort of frozen, almost like a suction table on the wall, stuck to the wall. It has that look. So there is something that's changed, but often considered a very exhibitable work. I want to show as the second one a work owned at the Wexner in Columbus, Ohio, called Area. This is an early image of it from 1968 when it was made, and it's made from these strips of wire mesh that have been coated with rubber and joined with wire along these seams. Soon after, in 1972, at the Guggenheim retrospective, somewhere during that time, it had been stored in a different way and lost that sort of scalloping pattern. And then when it entered the collection at the Wexner, that form was restored, and here you see it in a crate. And again, thick files. Martin Langer, who's here and has contributed greatly to knowledge, a body of knowledge on Hesse's works, had come up with a solution, a suggestion, as did Dennis Pihota, who worked with the 92 Yale show, to make a support for this piece that would help move it. Because as you can imagine, wire still can remain fairly flexible, but the rubber has not over time. So this piece, it is quite large. When you lift it, you need about 8 people moving it, and it flexes and rubber pops off. So every time you take it out and install it, you lose more and more rubber. And this crate was quite tight and quite constricting. So we, again, assembled a group of people, bringing together at the Wexner in advance of the Jewish Museum show, which involved Barry Rosen, Fred Wasserman, who's the curator at the Jewish Museum, Karen Nielsen, who is a designer, and art handlers, which, as many of us know, hold a lot of institutional memory and are so key in conversation. And also another key thing was that Helen Molesworth is then the curator. She was not there when we were working on the show in 2002. She is a scholar on Hesse as well, and I think having her there helped to inform this conversation and move it forward. Every person vocalized something that was very important to them. In designing something, in designing a solution, what is essential about this piece? What is core to it that we have to maintain in the treatment, and also what do we want a support structure to do? So things like rigidity, invisibility, minimal and easy to transport the piece. It would live under in storage, an exhibit, and transport, and that it was made of archival materials. So Karen came up with a very wonderful design. This is it in its crate, in a collapsible crate on its way to the Jewish Museum. It has an aluminum armature underneath it that you don't see while it's on view, and the vertical, that diagonal element comes apart when you're installing it. So here we are at the Jewish Museum with the piece on the floor, the structure underneath it, and the vertical element being placed on the wall, and the support structure being disassembled. And then here you see it. This is at the close of the exhibit. You see Ott in the background and Airy in the front. And I think there are two key things that I want to just highlight in these solutions. And one is that the support structure for both is quite different from expanded expansion, where you have cheesecloth, and that is very vulnerable to ripping. You have a canvas support and you have a wire support, both which are very structurally stable at this time and able to carry the rubber. The other thing that I thought was really key is, again, that more information is more information, and the accumulation of knowledge and people who have been working with this to a point to have that confidence to move ahead, changes in staff at the museums, that moment in time that happens where synergistically you're able to make that decision and move ahead. And I think we were successful in both of these. Yeah.
I'd love to shift to some questions, and I would love to start, first of all, by asking our panelists now to just augment what we've seen with what's on record. What did Hesse say, moving back to expanded expansion? Did Eva say things about expanded expansion that are useful to you in thinking this through, and maybe perhaps for the audience as well? Elizabeth, do you want to go?
I think she said relatively little about it. I mean, looking back through the records, she seems to have stopped it at an earlier point than she wanted to. So ideally, I think it would have been bigger. We know that, but so that in a way it's kind of unfinished. I think she also said that it was, as she said about so many things, that it could be reconfigured. That's another thing that she clearly seems to have said about it.
I have a note about, there seems to be some discussion about it being the sort of seeds of environmental art, and she does, in fact, address it a little bit. And she says, and I quote, its scale would make it environmental, but that's not enough to make something environmental. That it is leaning against the wall and it looks like a curtain. Those things make it superficially environmental, but I don't think that was the purpose. I thought I could make more sections so they could be extended to a length in which they really would be environmental, but illness prevented that. So she was definitely thinking about those concepts, but I'm not sure this piece went that far.
I think also some of her comments about rubber and deterioration of rubber are important to bring up, and both what we've learned through what Doug has said, and as you saw in the mock-up, and also in the Nemser interview, talking about an awareness of it, a concern of it, even the word guilty maybe that she used, but that was her choice. That was the material that got her where she needed to be with her work.
She definitely knew that this was fragile. I mean, Doug has said this, and she said it enough to know. And she also said in this interview, when she was very ill, that everything aged, and she didn't think that, artworks should be different from anything else in the world, and it was fine with her. And then she did say that she felt guilty because these things were going to change. So I think there's no doubt that she was aware that change was part of these works.
So the last 10 years has been, a process for each of you, I mean, as a group, but also as individuals. And I wanted to ask each of you to reflect on the past 10 years and to think about the moments, wherever they may have been, and whatever you may have doing, where your opinions were pushed, in a significant way. And I suspect it can be exhibitions, it could be examination, it could be the range of things. But I wonder if you could each comment on
One thing that I was, from the very beginning, taken up with museologically is that I really wanted there to be these sort of decayed works in the shows. It didn't bother me that some looked better than others, and I thought it went against, most exhibitions where everything has a sort of pristine quality and a sameness in a way. And so I thought early on in this process that there should be something old, and if something was old, and it should be in there, even if it was worrisome. And I think I still feel that way.
It begs sort of an interesting distinction between display, to be displayed, and to be seen. And I think that's something that we often struggle with works like this too. How about Michelle or?
I think probably a number of them, but the Roundtable, having people there definitely who knew her and worked with her or exhibited her work during her lifetime, but also a younger generation of people who were there who felt such power by these works that others in the group had written off. And the fact that you can't deny the incredible influence that she has had on numerous artists that have come after her. So that has really shaped my perception of it. And I think in particular, in the context of a conservative contemporary art, where in training, traditional training, when you come to these works as materials, okay, what do we have here? This is rubber, it's decayed. Can you reverse it? Can you restore it? Not really, not many options. So if you're looking at it just as a material, that it does make it very challenging. But if you also, as a conservative contemporary art, are looking at the qualities, that the importance of the work that may not be based in the material, and as a conservator, you're charged with preserving these works, and the work isn't necessarily all about the material, that's where I find where I'm now having another moment. Because I always thought that art was a really successful treatment and as a viable piece. And when I think about this quality of flow and her discussion about expanded expansion and the contradiction and the silliness of this rigidity and the flexibility and the drapery, which is just not there anymore. And if we are charged with preserving something and you can't bring that back, I don't have an answer to it yet, but that's something that has changed for me. I think I was more likely to show works, and now I'm feeling a conflict about that.
How about you, Carol?
I think I may have been shifting the other way and looking at art and wondering why that was acceptable and perhaps expanded expansion is not. And I think we're forgetting, one of the things that was very evident when we were trying to get this small panel to stand up, it was laying on the table and it looked small. It was just this, it looked beautiful, but it looked small. And then we lifted it and we realized that the scale of that work is so incredibly important. So you may have lost flexibility, but there are very few Hesse works out there that are that scale, that work with the space, that work with the room, that the observer has that kind of an experience. So if you're willing to look at art in that state, why wouldn't you be willing to look at expanded expansion in the state that it's in? And because she knew about the materials, she knew how they were going to age. I don't get the sense that I may not be able to say this because I'm putting words in her mouth, which I can't do.
Can I say one more thing? Both Carol and I, early this morning, were reading different things, and both at breakfast came up with the same thought, where she was talking about the absurdity and the silliness of it all, and we just can't help but think of the absurdity and the levels to which this discussion has gone, and also the absurdity of the rigidity adds another layer of absurdity to this, of displaying something that has, no longer flowing. And
Yeah, we just also wondered, would this be a silly discussion for her? Would it be, how would it be taken in? It's funny because I'm very absorbed with Ed Reinhardt at the moment, and he had a lot of writings, and I just want to read you this very quick extract from Eva's notes, and it sounds so much like some of the things that he was thinking of, that just all these oppositions and contradictions, and she writes, 1, art is what it is, 2, tension and freedom, 3, opposition, contradictions, 4, abstract symbol, 5, not symbols for something else, 6, detached but intimate, personal. So you can take anything, anything you want.
So, with that, I think I'd like to open it up, and I think what we had hoped to do is to be able to really shift our focus in this part of the discussion to the gallery and to the works that you've all been able to, the Eva Hesse portions that are there, and the Mockup, which is next to it. So can I ask Michelle to just get us off, just to talk a little bit about the installation of the work in the gallery? That would be great.
Okay, I'm looking at Andrew because we talked about this morning. I heard him tell somebody that it was 5 hours, and I didn't clock the exact amount. But Carol and the Guggenheim crew were coming out for this conference, and we had to install the piece last week. So it would have been a big trip for them to come out for a day to install last week. So I volunteered to come down from San Francisco and install it. And we ended up, it started at 7 in the morning, and there were emails and discussions about the route through the institution, the size of the crates, the doorways through the French period rooms, and how are we going to do this. And so it was just an interesting experience, and again, this whole collaboration thing, because we had not just collaboration among conservators, installers, and curators, conservation scientists, registrars, but also I think the collaboration under the Getty roof of people from different parts of the Getty that don't normally work together too, who were working together, and taking this work of contemporary art through the galleries, French period rooms. It was just wonderful seeing this piece come through. But I think we all of us that are so steeped in this know that there are many players in this, and that there are many different opinions that people carry about these works. And so I really felt like I was carrying all those different feelings and aware of everyone's different opinions. And the mock-up that we made wasn't installed till after I left, and we just had such a full day. And so I woke up the next morning to get a very early flight and had this panic attack, which Tom Lerner knows and Carol knows because I called them quite early in the morning, realizing just every single decision and little things that we are making, even in the display and how we display it, is influencing all of you for the first time you see that, and remember that 2008 installation and how it looked there, and that mock-up is right there, and what does that do? It's not are people going to think it's a replica because the Novros was there, and the responsibility of how we're now informing all of you was just quite stressful. And but having said that, bring it on, because we want to hear what you have to say. We really do. We really want to. We agreed to be part of this conference, not just to have the same conversation, but to move it forward. And I think Carol would be grateful to. All of us would be grateful.
I think we can just see where the hands are going up, and we've got a few.
Rosa Lowinger. First of all, that was an amazing presentation. It was really interesting. But it seems to me to address the question of closure and the stress and all that goes on with pieces like this, it seems like the answer is really somewhat simple. We just don't know how to restore pieces like this yet. and if it's okay in storage, if it's not okay, but if it's sort of reached a plateau in storage, and the issue would be putting it on its feet, maybe for the time being we need to use the mock-up to look at it and photographs, and maybe a future generation will have a better sense of how to do it. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I think we had. I think with both of the shows that I've been involved in, there's this sense of like, this is the last time you're going to see Hesse works. It's the last time we have this exhibit because we just don't know how long they will last. And it is true that some of them, I think we can say, are unexhibitable. That they've just deteriorated or they just don't exist. Some of the rubber works I'm thinking of in particular. So I think that is one of the reasons is if you wait or if some of them...
We may not have that long to wait. It has plateaued, but I think it's going to get more and more and more.
And even if that one piece has, the other works may not. And so if you have these moments in time with these retrospectives, there is, I think, this push to...
We also, I think, over the course of doing these shows, I've been involved in them all, that our sense of what's acceptable has changed so that people didn't think it was acceptable to show area with a support system under it. And once we got it there with the support system under it, we realized it was still a great work. So it's like the plateau keeps going up, for what's showable.
Jim Bernstein. Have you tried any environment whereby you make an envelope and you remove the oxygen or something to sort of freeze them in time? And before you answer that, I have my real comment is I love the session, thank you. And I think Jill and Carol and Michelle also know how dearly I love you personally. This is not a confession. I don't mind confessing that. But therefore, it disturbs me terribly. I mean, it looks like a great session, a lot of fun. I wish I could have been there playing with you. But it disturbs me terribly to see you working, cutting, snipping, tearing at fiberglass, and then hovering in a semi-outdoor environment over these vapors of noxious things. And ultimately, I hope in the film you can introduce something or a caveat to young artists so they realize how serious these issues are of the materials. And there are so many toxic materials in art materials, and these are amongst the most noxious. So I know you had to you didn't want masks because of the microphones, but somehow if you can work that in, I think it would be a good service. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. We knew that was going to come up. I think we sort of abandoned ourselves to the 1960s, and we were not in the lab. And I have to actually say, I think that the mock-up would have looked very different if we had been in the lab, and we would have done it very differently. And one of the things I learned about in this process, and because we had Doug and it could go so quickly, is that piece, it's 30 feet long and 10 feet high, but it probably could be made in a week. And, it takes us 25 years to decide if we could stand it up. It is a little bit absurd. So, but thank you. I agree. It was not the best idea to do it that way.
Hi. Jill Whitten over here. I was wondering several things. Would it be possible for us to look at expanded expansion in her studio while we talk?
Sure.
The archival photograph. Do you think that in the mock-up that the rubber was applied in roughly the same way and the same thickness and various unevenness as she applied it? That's one question. Were textile conservators involved in issues of storage and supporting the piece when you pick it up? And have you had a chance to analyze what the talc might have done over time?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm forgetting the first one.
The first one
application,
was
sure.
the thickness.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
No, again, we just saw the mock-up. We made it earlier last month, and we just saw it for the first time on Thursday, and it definitely had darkened already, which was interesting. But I think we got the fiberglass poles probably pretty similar, and because that also was something that Doug was so closely involved with. We don't feel like we hit the rubber right, and that's okay. That wasn't our purpose in doing it either. But we were looking for trying to understand drapery too. So I don't know. I think did you hear something or read something that it was one layer?
I did read something that it was one layer, and we put on two. One of the things, though, when we were looking at the piece very closely in the warehouse, we could see different application hands. Some people were very painterly, some people were daubing, and so in some ways the three of us we were all working in our own way, did in fact have something to do with the original. But I think it's not exactly the same. And that, as Michelle said, that wasn't really our intention to make it perfect. Yeah. That's a good question. You asked whether we knew what the talc had done to the surface. Well, we actually removed the talc on the piece that you're looking at standing up.
I wonder if Martin, do you know?
What it did
I'm putting
to
you on the
surface
spot.
is a good question.
You need the microphone. I'm putting Martin on the spot here, who's done probably more analysis than other conservators on Hesse's works.
Well, the talc was added to prevent the latex from sticking together.
Yeah.
And also, if you would, you will have a problem with your maquette because it's going to stick together, I would suspect. So talc just keeps it from sticking.
But does it deteriorate the rubber in any way? Does it have any effect on the rubber?
No.
No.
No negative effect.
It changes dramatically when you take the talc off, the visual aspect of the piece.
They become quite shiny. Can you vacuum it off?
Well, you can't vacuum it off this piece, or you'll be taking rubber. We were using those, what are they called? Those yellow sponges that you.
Rubber sponges.
So no, they're German, and you can squeeze them out so that they have very little.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm wondering if we can save that conversation for perhaps after the session and really sort of gather people's impressions of the gallery. I think we're really interested to hear your thoughts about what you're seeing.
Are we supposed to be pointing to people?
Hi, Wynne Phelan. Is there an end point to the rubber where it will just liquefy?
I think not. It goes through a liquid phase and then becomes hard and brittle. So once it goes through that, and I think this work has already gone through that. If it were going to become liquid, it doesn't happen all over. But if it does, I think this work's already gone.
So it's fairly stabilized in the condition it's in.
Yes.
Thank you.
Robert Proctor. I'm just interested in so much, we've talked so much philosophically, and now here we're talking so technically. And my impression, particularly in the gallery, I don't know that much about Eva Hesse, but I'm terribly sad. And I see the piece in the crate. It's like a viewing at a funeral to me. And I'm wondering if other people have this sort of feeling of our desire to revive these pieces as, hoping we wish we had Eva back. And I just wondered if you had any. I'm just crushed here.
I think that that structure it's on is making that much more pronounced, I think. I would like to just throw out there, because when I saw the piece, I think I've said this already, but when I saw the piece in '88, I think that the aging is quite beautiful. and the fact, I'm very curious to hear from the people that feel so sad about how it looks, if they just can't tolerate that degree of deterioration.
It looks sad, but it's like, this stuff killed, didn't it kill her?
No.
No.
That's just a myth.
No.
Yes.
Oh, how about over here?
I just want to. I think it looks gorgeous in the crate, the original. I mean, yes, it's very, very degraded, but I think it looks so lovely, and certainly not in its original form. But I don't think it's dead at all.
So you would exhibit it?
Absolutely.
Leah Levy, I would like to know what the representatives of the estate think about the installation and hear what they have to say about it.
Do you want to
represent? If they feel like talking.
Can we get a microphone? Wait, Helen.
I found the installation incredibly moving, and I just want to thank this group of people for an outstanding devotion and care and intellect in presenting this work. And I'm very proud and very happy that it's at the Guggenheim.
Well, I think that's the appropriate last word. So I have a very, before you clap, okay, after you clap. But there's one important announcement, which is that for those of you who have RSVP'd to attend the Inca Artists Archive database, please meet outside the auditorium because you're going to be escorted to the seminar room. And because of the seminar, we need the full hour and 15 minutes for lunch. So we will start again at 2:15. And thank you all so much.